just look at a satellite, you don't have to be a meteorologist, and you can just see that this is an amazing hurricane. Notice the distinct eye and also the symmetrical nature of this. It's just actually it's a beautiful shot if you didn't know how intense this is. And speaking of intense, 180 mile an hour max wind, movement to the west. It's chugging along, and it's unfortunately heading right towards Antigua and also the British Virgin Islands. It may take a direct catastrophic hit. And look at where the scale begins. Anything above 156 miles an hour, catastrophic. So 180 miles an hour is just unbelievable. So top 7 strongest hurricanes ever in the tropical Atlantic. Now here's the ominous path I was alluding to earlier, and notice how it stays. If it stays in the center of this cone, it will likely stay mostly over water and maintaining a very strong strength, even still category 4 by Saturday, just north of Cuba, and then inevitably it looks like it's going to take a turn into Florida or somewhere in the southeastern United States, and it may go right up the peninsula. Some of the forecast models have that occurring.
Wow.
Good grief, that would be
that is just
really
all bad news.
And that's why they're starting already, start their emergency plans down there.
And that's the good news is they have time.
They have
some time. Okay, and the warnings are there. Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's get over to meteorologist Lauren Oleski. 6:48 is the time. What's the latest on Irma?
It is a strong, strong storm, Suzanne. Winds are at 150 miles per hour. That eye is very, very well defined. Anytime you can see a really, really well defined eye, that means a storm is really strong. It's very well organized. Outer bands already moving into the Leeward Islands there. They're going to see the direct impacts from that within the next 24 hours. And you'll see those hurricane warnings are issued for the northern Leeward Islands and for Puerto Rico. There we go, 150 mile per hour winds. Pressure has gone down a little bit. When the pressure drops, that does show a sign of strengthening. Now, Irma is going to, in one way or another, kind of come into contact with some of the islands that are across the Caribbean there. So, yeah, the middle of the storm might be north of the DR, but that doesn't mean that the southern portion of the storm won't potentially move over that area. So because of that, when Irma comes into contact with any kind of land, the storm weakens. So we could see it as a little bit of a weaker category 4 storm that's still extremely strong. Now, this is Sunday. That's when that cone ends for us. It doesn't show the jot up to the north just yet because that's likely not going to happen until very early into the day on Sunday. So the timing's pushing back a little bit. But right now, all of South Florida is in that cone. So here's a look at the computer models, the spaghetti plots we call them. Now, this is going to show you that jot up to the north, again, happening during the day on Sunday. So this potentially looks like a Sunday storm for us. Now, where it makes landfall, that will probably change over the next several days up until Irma gets here. So the GFS, the American model, has in fact moved the storm. So again, every model run that comes out, things are going to move and things are going to change, which is why we're just telling you that you need to be prepared. So this is a look at Sunday. There we go, moving the storm up the eastern coast. That would mean we could be dealing with the eye wall in the strongest part of the hurricane. But again, things will change over the next few days. The European model has it closer to the southwestern side of the state. You'll see that here. The timing still looks to be on Sunday for us, but look at that, the middle of the storm moving up the west coast there, which would put us in tropical storm force winds, especially for areas along the coastline. Okeechobee, you might deal with maybe some stronger activity, maybe hurricane force winds if it moves through southwest Florida.
All attention is on Hurricane Irma, a very powerful and dangerous storm here approaching the Leeward Islands. Right now, winds are at 185 miles per hour. This was upgraded to a Category 5 hurricane earlier today. It's the first Category 5 hurricane of the season. It's moving west at 14 miles per hour. And once we get into tonight and once we get into Wednesday, that's where we really have to watch. Is this going to take more of a west-northwesterly track? And that's going to help us to determine where Irma will end up later on in the week. Regardless, we're already seeing evacuations and also state of emergencies issued. Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, all of these locations under a state of emergency. In Florida, all 7,000 members of the Florida National Guard are to report for duty on Friday. And in the Florida Keys, we already have mandatory evacuations beginning Wednesday morning. And we're also even seeing some evacuations in Miami-Dade County. The school districts, the county offices beginning Thursday are closed. So right now our steering flow is around the periphery of this area of high pressure, but you'll notice a large territory here looking at the threats of catastrophic flooding and also some destructive winds as well. Later in the week, we'll be looking more in the time frame of more toward, I should say, Hispaniola, also the Bahamas, even Cuba. And then by the weekend, we will have to watch out for southern Florida. So at this point, it remains to be seen where exactly Irma is going to end up. Should it end out toward the Gulf, right up the Florida Peninsula, or toward the East Coast? Again, we're still several days out here, so it's certainly something we are going to watch. Here's a look at our eye path over the next couple of days. It's expected to maintain its strength as a major hurricane. And then once we get into Sunday, that's where we could begin to see some impacts down in southern Florida and the Florida Keys.
And the hurricane hunters flying here through Irma, gathering data for the National Hurricane Center. Waves churning up here in Guadalupe with the approach of Irma, and folks lining up in Florida gathering supplies to prepare for Hurricane Irma's approach. And if you are in Irma's path, this is about as bad as it gets. Irma is one of the strongest hurricanes on record and a major threat to life and property. Top sustained winds 185 miles per hour. Of course, a Category 5 hurricane. It continues to approach the northern Leeward Islands, and we are anticipating catastrophic impacts as we go through tonight and tomorrow. Then on Wednesday, it's going to be moving on to the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Notice we do have watches and warnings up. These areas are going to see a dangerous mix of destructive winds, life-threatening surge, heavy rain, also flooding. And as this hurricane pushes through, it is going to be remaining a Category 5 hurricane. And with winds, with the Category 5, we're talking about destroying homes and buildings, uprooting trees, knocking out power in some of these areas for months. It will continue on its path, working in the direction of Cuba and the Bahamas, and then Florida. Florida, you could start to see the impacts with tropical storm force winds here as late as Friday, hurricane conditions coming in on Saturday and Sunday. Florida, we do have certainty that you need to be prepared for this hurricane. Beyond that, there still is some uncertainty in the path, but anyone here along the Gulf or the East Coast that potentially could be affected needs to make their plans now. Folks are lining up here in Miami, Florida, as well as much of South Florida as they continue to wait in line for supplies, get everything they need for Hurricane Irma. Folks need to prepare, and luckily they are, because Hurricane Irma is an extremely powerful hurricane. Here are the top 4 things you need to know. Hurricane Irma right now has top sustained winds of 180 miles per hour. That is a Category 5 hurricane, the strongest Atlantic hurricane on record outside of the Caribbean and the Gulf. We've got a big area of high pressure that has been steering Irma over toward the west. Now watching a trough here in the eastern U.S. Potentially that is going to be determining exactly where and when Irma is going to be turning, and that would depend on the strength and also the timing of that trough. As far as the winds, these winds are going to extend far out from the actual center of the hurricane. Hurricane force winds outward to about 60 miles per hour right now. We're talking about tropical storm force winds out 160 miles. Add to that, we're talking about very heavy amounts of rainfall along the path as it goes over the islands toward Florida. This could lead to catastrophic flooding and also mudslides in the island and huge problems for folks in Florida.
More on Irma's path, meteorologist Tom Sater in the Weather Center with the latest. Talk to me.
Well, Brooke, everybody take a good look at this because you don't see this very often. continues to stagger the imagination with its rapid development and its growth. It just got stronger by another 5 miles per hour. This now ties the second strongest hurricane we've ever had in recorded history for the Atlantic Basin. It ties Hurricane Wilma, excuse me, that's 2005. Just behind now, Hurricane Allen in 1980. We've got winds up to 185 miles per hour. This is going to devastate the northern islands of the Lesser Antilles, and I think probably the eye will move right over the island of Anguilla. And again, it's not going to discriminate between million-dollar homes and nice accommodations and hotels, and of course everyone else who lives around the islands. After it moves through there, we've got warnings now. British and U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, they're under a state of emergency. We could see maybe 9, 10, 11-foot storm surges with this, and not to mention that even though the center may stay over land or water for the most part, those hurricane winds, Brooke, are so broad, they're going to knock out power and communications to much of the island chain. Now, as we watch it progress forward, we're going to need every single day this week, because there will be fluctuations in its strength, interacting with land, not just the eye, but most likely the outer bands will cause it to maybe drop to a Category 3. If it makes its way over Cuba and the northern coast, could drop to a 2. But I think we're going to find the waters, which we know are much warmer closer to Florida than where it is now. That's going to be like jet fuel. So every day is important to watch this. The computer models, an excellent agreement. Sometime on Saturday, we thought yesterday maybe it would be Friday, but now Saturday it will get picked northward, picked up. It'll turn to the right. But until that turn happens, we cannot let anybody know for sure exactly where landfall will be. The models are really interesting because some of them are on the east coast of Florida, some up toward the Carolinas, and then a little bit maybe on the west coast, maybe into the Gulf of Mexico. We can't rule that out yet either. But again, if you look at some of the models now, this is a European model in blue, the U.S. model, which handle these storms really nicely. In fact, the European has been spot on even with Harvey last week. But watch what happens when it gets to Cuba and then moves to the north. As we get into Monday overnight, again, this is September 11th, we've got the U.S. model scraping the coast, much like last year when Matthew moved up in this area. We had historic flooding in the Carolinas. But the European, even since last Thursday, Brooke, has placed it in this area again on Monday. That'll make a possible landfall in southwest coastline of Florida. But anything still goes. And as we watch this move northward, I mean, we're looking at a major category, either 3, 4, or possibly a 5. And when these models continue to show our zone right now, all these models have to do with the U.S. model. We know we're looking at a significant impact by the end of the week. But every day is going to be important, Brooke, as you know.